Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us so early in the morning. I know there's a lot of bright and bushy eyes here today. Today we're going to be talking about the challenges of spatial audio for live performance. And I've got a lovely panel here with me today. We'll first make a round of introductions. We'll start off with Jane. If you want to tell a little bit about yourself and your experience with spatial audio.
Certainly. Hi, everyone. So my name is Jane Arnison, and I am a producer. I'm an engineer and also a sound artist. I work in education as well. And my experience with spatial, working within the spatial context kind of crosses over all of those aspects. Back in the 90s, I was kind of experimenting with quadraphonic and 5.1 systems, and then it fell away. And then researched like 5 years ago, and I've been happily part of that wave, experimenting in kind of production, looking into Dolby Atmos, also working with ambisonic, object-based SPAT iterations in Macs and things like that. And more latterly, I've been reinvigorating it in my own art practice in installations and kind of live sound experiences, so to say. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And we've also got Hilary Cox.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you for organizing this talk. I am here both in the capacity of exploring the spatial audio in my practice as a sound artist, and also in the sense that I work as a technical coordinator and curator of some spaces in Berlin, including the interdisciplinary arts venue 90 Mill, as well as a few other venues around the city where I've been testing different configurations for live performance in a spatial ambisonic format.
Great, thanks. And Marcela Rada.
I am an audio engineer, studio. So my experience comes from recording and mixing music. I started recording with spatial audio technology back in 2015 or so, and I've been researching it since. So my master's focused on ambisonics for VR, and then I'm now doing a PhD in immersive music production at the University of Surrey. My PhD research focuses on creative workflows. It's called Workflows and Guidelines for Immersive Music Production. And it focuses on, it's very much about everyone who is a part of the production process and ensuring that everybody, researching how can everybody actually have a role in this, and not so much about how the creative decisions always fall on the mixing engineer. And so I founded the Immersive Lounge, and we are an immersive music production collective, and we guide artists throughout the process of composing, arranging, producing, recording, mixing, and releasing their music in immersive formats.
Great, thanks. And I'm Andrew Rahman. I'm the co-founder and president of the Spatial Media Lab here in Berlin. We're a nonprofit space that is helping to make spatial media easier to create. And this involves creating different solutions, software and hardware, as well as putting on events and working with artists and providing knowledge for getting more people into spatial audio, because it is a bit of a technical learning curve. And we're technology agnostic, so we will help you with whatever challenge you have presented with you at whatever scale. So you're always welcome to reach out to us. And we'll jump right in to the conversation now. And I think it's important to just get a certain baseline before we jump into this. So the question is, what is spatial audio? That's such a general term. Oftentimes it's confusing. People have different misconceptions of what that means or what it doesn't mean. So I like a quote from Abbey Road Studios, which says, spatial audio is any audio which gives you a sense of space beyond conventional stereo, allowing the listener to pinpoint where sound is coming from, whether this is above, below, or a full 360 degrees around you. So this could be quadraphonic, this could be ambisonic, this can be full dome, this can be, anything in between Dolby Atmos, what have you. But today I want us to focus on not the studio side, because the studio side is more or less solved, right? There's free solutions for producing spatial audio in the studio, a number of them. There's free solutions for Dolby Atmos, so you can publish directly to streaming platforms for distribution. And there's ambisonics, for example, which can also be used in live performance, which we often do with the Spatial Media Lab, and several other on stage do as well. But the challenge then becomes, okay, what do you do after you've done these productions? The Dolby Atmos side of things, right? This cannot play back live because of the buffer time, right? I know we're getting technical right away, but so you can't use this in a live context very meaningfully unless it's backing tracks. And with ambisonics, you can produce your project, your event, and then what do you do with it? Then you're stuck with this file that, okay, now who can listen to it, right? So these are some of the challenges that I want to talk about and jump into, focusing on this live performance side of things. So this includes not only just the technical hurdles and challenges to get into it, but also this, what do you do with after you've done this production? And okay, now I've done it at this venue, can I take it to the next one? Maybe not, right? So Jane, you have quite a bit of experience with this. We talked about it briefly before, right? So tell me about your experience with your spatial audio productions. What are some of the challenges that you encounter and that you see that there's clearly just a gap that needs to be solved?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, when you say I have experience, I feel as though I'm kind of fumbling in the dark most of the time, to be honest. But yeah, I try and get in and just do it as best as I can. Also, just quick shout out to your the ambisonic Dolby Atmos conversion stuff that the Spatial Media Lab produces. I just released a 3-part EP of some of my stuff that I performed spatially, but never kind of released it properly. So thank you for that. It was very cool.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Check it out on streaming services, of course, in Dolby Atmos. Anyway, but so for these kinds of works that I've done, they've always been kind of one-offs that I've generally either created bespoke for a room or for an event, or I've kind of made them and then kind of figured out how I want to, how I want to set it up in terms of the multi-speaker system. So I've done a lot of stuff with quadraphonic because it's the easiest thing to implement. And I guess I started off, if I talk about my kind of second coming of my immersive project in the last 8 years, since 2017, I guess, 2016. I did a 4.1 installation at the Pop Culture Festival. We had a commission and we set up in the above the France Club or somewhere around there. I think it was the Deaf Institute that we performed in. So I was able to set that room up for 2 days or something. So it was great to kind of figure it out and explore it. And at that time, I worked with just simple spatial panner and some kind of simple manipulations. And then more recently, I've did an octaphonic installation at the Collegium Hungarium, which is opposite the Gorky Theatre. And again, most of the time I'm kind of installing it and setting up the speakers myself in order to make it work. So to answer your question, the gap is having rooms and venues, because of course I'm kind of trying to tune it. The room is not set up exactly properly. It's kind of maybe not quite phase aligned, but I make it work to the best of my ability. So the gap is in venues figuring out in their tech team or even installing and setting their room up in a way that it can be used for ideas beyond stereo. There's also just one more quick thing, is that also often people say it's quadraphonic and then you get there and it's just double stereo. So yeah.
Okay, great. So in your experience, you're, as you said, primarily setting up and tuning the room and bringing your own speakers or what have you. You're being the engineer in that case, and the venue is not already pre-prepared for that, let's say, right?
It's just a box, essentially.
Yeah, so it's a black box, and you come in and you're setting everything up yourself. And at least in that case, you have full control over that process. But wouldn't it be nice if that was already
Yes.
there, right?
Would be
And
amazing.
like you said, tuned and prepared. So to that topic, Hilary, you're working at Zenner here in Berlin, yeah, and they have a spatial audio setup there that is fixed, or is this also like Jane's experience?
Sure, thank you. So to kind of clarify this, I am kind of an assistant to the tech team at this venue where a creative collaborator of mine is responsible for creating configurations for events in the space. And one of the things that makes Zenner kind of unique in the way that it operates is that they often completely reconfigure the space for every event in a different way. Additionally, they have a fairly substantial archive of components from the company L Acoustics. And so one of the ongoing projects that we have is going into the space and testing configurations for multi-channel ambisonic formats,
Nice.
both to develop our own performance projects and also to create frameworks that could then be offered to artists who will be performing in the space. And in the capacity of working in technical direction for event spaces, I find this to be an interesting and meaningful process in just thinking of how to create means of cross-compatibility for artists to come into a space and also perform live in a multi-channel format.
So in your case, you are that gap. You're already filling that gap for Jane because you're going in, you're testing different speaker configurations, you're creating templates for artists to come in and start using. Is that correct?
I would say so, yes.
That's great. So the reason that I found your work so interesting is that this topic of templates, I think, is essential to this process, to getting people into performing live with spatial audio, because it gives you the first step into that direction to play around. And in many cases, you can have a binaural render at home. So, I mean, it's not perfect, certainly, but it at least gives you your foot in the door. So when you show up at the venue, you're not going from zero to show running in the couple hours you have, right? So that's really great. So are there any interesting configurations that you found that are atypical, or are you going in the direction of kind of quadraphonic, octaphonic? Are you also there working with 3D sound, so vertical as well, and you're creating templates for all of this, yes?
So the main configuration that we've been testing is an 8-channel octaphonic array. I would love to work in 3D or 4D sound. We haven't had the capacity to test this type of format yet in the space, but it is on the agenda for this year. I would say, actually, I had the opportunity to attend a workshop series with 4D Sound from the Netherlands, which is really interesting. But it also sparked a certain thought that I often come to, which is in terms of offering these configurations to artists, we come up against the challenge that there are different, often somewhat proprietary platforms, in that 4D Sound have their own platform for programming spatial acoustics. In our productions that I've been working on, we've been using the platform called
Envelope?
Envelope or Envelope?
Envelope?
Envelope. Thank you. And then there's also Dolby. So I think it's an interesting question to just kind of assess which of these platforms is the best to invest time in, especially with just emergent technologies in general. We often kind of choose our toolbox, but then there are limitations within that. So
Totally. It's like a format war right now, almost, right? So on that side, when getting an artist to come in, like I mentioned, templates are so important. To get this conceptually in your head, I think the only way that really works is to sit in front of some speakers. When you're in front of the speakers and you're playing around, this just clicks. I've seen it repeatedly with artists. You explain, you show the tool set, you give documentation, you give a template, what have you, you get some binauralization. And as soon as they're in front of the speakers, it's like, I get it. Now I understand what's happening. So Marcela, your experience in the studios and working to get artists from the studio to a live setting, are you experiencing a similar kind of reaction from people that the speakers really just open up their ears, so to speak? And from that, since you're doing research specifically on workflows, on the topic of these different technologies, some being proprietary and whatnot, I'm very curious on your thoughts. What are you seeing in this format war? What are some of the really promising directions?
I know you want to move on from studio to live, but I don't think the studio environment is solved. And there are quite a lot of challenges that then continue to be a challenge when the artist goes into a live performance. And one big challenge is just a huge knowledge gap. And people at recording studios are still figuring out how to make it work. So I don't think it's solved in that regard because calibration is an issue. Because people are leaving everything for the mixing stage. And so what we do at the Immersive Lounge is actually monitor in 714 while we record, which is not common practice yet, for example. So by the time that you get to mix it, if you record it in a certain way, how would you know? We record with immersive recording techniques, which have been researched for decades, and we know about them. But it is a challenge to know how to apply them in that environment, especially I'm speaking about commercial music. So these challenges that we have in the studio environment, also the fact that the knowledge gap is also very big coming from artists, because simply the training for this is new for music. And so a lot of artists haven't been exposed to it. And so they come in, they don't really understand, they just kind of don't want to do it, or if they have to do it. And this is because major record labels will be pushing for this to happen. And this is because Dolby Atmos mixes pay higher royalties on streaming platforms. So because of this, a lot of music is just mixed in Dolby Atmos. The artist sometimes doesn't even listen to it. They don't approve it. The record label approves it, and then it's out in streaming, So that's a challenge that's still happening in studio.
Absolutely.
And so I think the biggest thing is to get the artist involved from the beginning. And so to answer your question, I think it's so important that the artist understands the value, number one, that they can be inspired by the technology, and that the whole production is made with intent, with the goal of the listener experience, taking into account the listener experience in an immersive environment, whether it's binaural and headphones, and also in a live environment eventually. If the artist composes and produces with all of this in mind, by the time they get to the live setup, they'll know what they want. They know how they want it to sound. They'll be able to have an input. They'll be able to talk to the engineer, whoever is at the venue, and they'll be able to communicate how they want it to sound. And so these are creative decisions. You're lucky if you have an engineer who will also get very creative with you. But if you don't, if the engineer is just putting things around, how could you make that actually work for your music? So if you really care about how your music sounds, you want to be able to make those decisions for a live setup. So what you were saying, then you become an engineer in a way. But I think it's just you don't need to become an engineer if you're not. It's a matter of understanding what can be done and think about it creatively.
Yeah, that I think is probably the main essential key there is starting from the very beginning with artistic intention. Of course, we need engineers and groups and people putting together this technical pipeline to make it easier and providing educational documentation to make this process easier. But ultimately, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? Moving all the sounds around all the time ultimately just sounds like mush, right?
Right. And another thing that comes from studio is that the artists who are working with spatial audio technology will mix their music in Dolby Atmos because Dolby Atmos is the platform supported by streaming platforms. So if they do everything in Dolby Atmos, but then now they want to take this to a live setting, they could use the Dolby Atmos ADM file and kind of try and work it out. But I've talked to a lot of artists who end up recreating the whole thing again.
Exactly.
And so do they want to do that? It's kind of also discouraging to have to do it all over again because
Exactly.
they have to use a different system.
I
or
feel you
something.
on that one. I've been doing a lot of that recently, both ways, kind of trying to figure out, and I feel that I'm spending half of my time, I'm just constantly changing the spatial format, and it feels like a lot of wasted time. Yeah.
It's a big challenge.
Yeah, something I think that's really beneficial about all of this is something that we haven't said yet, is object-based audio.
Yes.
So if you're not familiar with the OSC ADM conversation that's going on right now, a lot of the major players like D&B, L Acoustics, Meyer Sound, BBC, all these folks are creating a standard for the OSC. If you're not familiar with that, that's the Open Sound Control format. It's basically like a competitor to MIDI, I guess you could say, in some ways. And most of this technology is running on OSC to a degree, and they're building in a framework within the ADM file format to allow for all of these different technologies to kind of live under the same umbrella. So in a perfect world, you would be able to then translate from one to the other with that ADM file. That's in a perfect world. We're definitely not there yet.
Sounds amazing. It will get. I think it will happen, and I think it needs to. Yeah, as the investment in the industry has been so significant in the last couple of years, it feels as though there's enough that there's a momentum to make this work in a way that, because I think, as you were saying, if the music can only work in one format and can't work live, it will again fall back into the abyss. And I think that this is why why this is such a great conversation to be having now, is that it's the second part that needs to be discussed in order for spatial audio as a format to really take hold and to really be this new future that everyone talks about. Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously artistic intent, this is critical, as Marcela mentioned, especially because also as Marcela mentioned, I do also see this, that in the Dolby Atmos world, the labels are coming down from on high and saying this needs to be in Dolby Atmos, and so they're pushing engineers to do a mix in spatial, and the artist doesn't even know about it. Or
Right. I would like to say, though, that I'm not trying to say that the record label doesn't care, because they do. They have quality control. They created guidelines for
Yes.
artists and for engineers, at least for engineers, to kind of understand what works and what doesn't. And so by the time that it gets released, hopefully it has gone through quite a few steps of quality control. So they do care. They want it to sound good because it's for our benefit for people to prefer that mix over stereo. I didn't mean to say that they don't care and that they just care about the royalties.
Yeah.
But it is true that there's still a push. And so for this reason, the artists are not involved in that process.
Totally. So it seems like this next generation of artists coming up, we need to make sure that they understand why you would want to move sounds around and position sounds around. And like you mentioned, you don't need to be an engineer if you don't want to necessarily. When we worked with Carolina Hayek, she's a world-class thereminist, was just in Australia playing with their orchestra. And she had a vision already for where the sounds should be positioned and why they should be there. And so we were able to take that vision that she had and be the engineers for her to help her fulfill that vision. And that really makes things a lot easier. And I think the end result is ultimately much better because as I've noticed, at least to get back, we're harping a lot on Dolby Atmos, and I'm sorry, but they are kind of the dominant player in this arena at this point. Basically, when I hear a lot of Dolby Atmos productions, it feels like stereo plus. Like you got your left,
I
right,
agree with that.
and sometimes some stuff's coming out of the center, and then you have some effects that swirl around, and the reverbs are coming from behind you, and that's it. That's that. I would say, to quote someone at Super Booth, 85% of the stuff on Dolby Atmos is shit. It's basically like this. I don't agree with that, but just this was the sentiment: is that it's like no one's really taking advantage of the technology to really, take it to the next level. And I think this has to come back to artistic intent. But then again, having this artistic intent, I agree. We see this with Jane and with Hilary. You have this idea that you want to do, and you're able to then set up the speakers, set up the technical pipeline that works for you, and then be able to play out your vision on this. So what do you think? This is open to whoever wants to answer, maybe all of you. What do you think is that step? How do we bridge that gap and help artists think beyond stereo and start thinking about why to position sounds in different locations and what narrativistic and dramaturgical aspects could be conveyed through spatial audio?
Are we answering this from a personal, what are we doing to do this, or what we think should happen? Is it?
Either, like it's really open at this point because this is one of the gaps that we've identified is this artistic intent. How do we help artists bridge that? So, I mean, if you have a personal experience where for you had this eureka aha moment, maybe that will help someone in the room.
I'll start. Yeah. I'm bringing artists for pre-production sessions into the studio. I tell them about the technology. I get them to listen to different examples that I think are effective and that could relate to the genre that they make. I also talk about misconceptions because there are a lot of misconceptions about spatial audio. And so you got to clear those up to make sure that if they come with strong opinions, and there might be things that are outdated at this point, because the reality is the spatial audio has been around for such a long time, and people have opinions that perhaps of things that they heard years ago. But a lot of these things have changed. So I speak about those, which I think is just so important to overall talk about that. But and then I let them kind of get creative, play with the tools in ways that are not overwhelming, but just kind of get them to bring in some of their music, listen to it, play with things, and really start planning for the recording session. And I work a lot with actual organic elements, acoustic instruments. And so by the time we get to the recording, we would have already done rehearsals, for example, in the space and how it would sound in the space. And then we think about how we're going to record it. But the artist is having, they're listening throughout that process. I think it's also important to get them to listen in binaural format, because otherwise they're always thinking, well, how is my listener going to get this? And so if the binaural, if the binaural render is effective, then they'll get it. But that's also a challenge, because when we talk about binaural, it's a different experience for every single human in the world. And so it will be effective for a person, and it will be completely ineffective for another person. But there are many tools out there that allow you to hopefully get a good, effective binaural experience.
What tools do you have that were the best?
Well, I got my HRTF measured in a quick chamber, so that's not accessible at all.
Yeah.
It's not accessible at all. But HRTF. So I would like to talk about HRTFs, head-related transfer function. If you're not familiar with it, I'll quickly explain. It takes into account how we as human beings perceive sound naturally. And so our external ears filter sound, and they allow us to localize sound. If we didn't have our external ears, we wouldn't be able to tell where sounds are coming from. Our head and our shoulders also have an influence in how we perceive sound. And so this HRTF measurements take into account our physiology and then calculate, and then we can hear through 2 channels on headphones a 3D sound space, just taking into account interaural time differences, so how long it takes for a specific sound to reach each ear, depending on where it's located in that 3D space, and then interaural level difference, the difference in level, and many other things. But we've had HRTFs for a long time. There are standard HRTFs out there that apply to Dolby Atmos, for example. Anything that you listen on headphones that Spatial would have an HRTF applied. Now, these HRTFs and these measurements that we consider standards at this point work for some people and don't work for others. One of the reasons is that when these measurements were being done many years ago, the participants, the demographic was white males. And so for this reason, a lot of the standard HRTFs would be effective for that demographic and maybe not for others. So there are new measurements being done at the moment. And so hopefully those HRTFs will become even more effective in the future and will kind of translate well to everyone. So a good binaural experience, I think, also is it's good for artists to be inspired by.
Okay, so to quickly summarize, from your perspective, access and play and a good HRTF for binaural.
Or a good binaural experience. The HRTF
experience.
it wouldn't even matter for some people. So I'm not saying that you need it.
Yeah.
I'm saying that it could be effective or not.
Great. So again, to wrap back around, how can we bridge this gap with artists and help them understand and conceptualize why to move sounds around in different positions and place them around? How can we help them?
So from my perspective, it's, I think, critical listening, having the opportunity to be in an environment and to listen and to learn how to listen and to just have and when I say critical listening, not just kind of put people in the room, but actually kind of an experience of teaching people how to listen and what to listen for and how to find their way through the sounds in this way, because it's different. And I think that is really important to develop the critical attention to the ears. And then I think the second thing, I also work in education, and I've been teaching immersive environments in various iterations for the last many years, 6, 7, 8 years or something now. And I think it's a real struggle, and it became a really big struggle when Dolby Atmos emerged, in that it was always a kind of a niche thing that people were specifically interested in, and those people that are interested in it are interested from the beginning. They think about space as a creative driving force and part of the development of the sound experience. The Dolby Atmos, everyone just decided it was about spatial panning in the mix stage, right at the end, and that's all that spatial audio is. And so I think that I've really noticed over the last years that in the education context, it's become harder again because of the industry changes. So, and again, how do I try and buck that trend is to challenge the students to listen to music that is beyond is experimental, and it challenges their idea of what music is, of what how space can be conceived, and things like that. So yeah, what do you think?
So I'm thinking about how developing these kind of toolkits to offer to artists in the context of venues that may not be specifically or exclusively immersive, but have this as an option, is something that we would benefit by thinking about in terms of being able to also frame it as something that can be offered to people like curators and event organizers who can then share that information with the artists that they're bringing on to their lineups. Because I kind of agree with what you said, that there is a certain kind of specific focus where people can exist in a bubble where they know very deep levels of knowledge about this format. But I would love to see a more accessible means for people to come into a space and have access.
Well, on that note, the Spatial Media Lab is an open space in Berlin where people can come and have these kinds of listening experiences and also play around. It's only €10 a month to join, and then any hour that you contribute to building out the space, whether that's doing social media or we just built last month some new bass traps. So things of this nature, then that's 1 free hour of playtime for whatever reason you want on the speakers. So that's something that we are trying to provide because we also see that it's very difficult to get access to a ton of speakers, right? One thing that I want to point out to answer that question that I posed to all of you is I also think that having more speakers really just changes things, because personally, I've not had a particularly good experience with any binaural renders. I don't have a custom HRTF made in an anechoic chamber yet, unfortunately. Maybe someone with an anechoic chamber wants to invite me. But at this point, most of the time it's okay. So for me, the real revelatory experience was sitting in front of some speakers. So this is part of why we provide that. And I had a great conversation with a guy, I cannot remember his name, unfortunately, because it was a few years back, who runs a quadraphonic vinyl record label out of LA. And he's been doing it for quite a long time, was a producer for Beck in the 90s. And he said, I think quadraphonic is the dipping your toe in the water of spatial audio. It's been around for ages. It's just 2 more speakers. Speakers can be quite cheap these days. You don't have to get super high-end speakers. And it's at least for artists a way to start playing around with this idea of, oh, I can move sounds around. Even though it's just on a horizontal plane, yes, theoretically, you can do first-order ambisonics in a tetrahedron, whatever. But nonetheless, just getting another set of speakers, throwing them behind you and seeing what you can do. Just start playing around with the idea of moving sounds around, because there's so many free tools that exist, as I mentioned, for the studio side of things. And with that, because the bar is so low, it's very easy to take that into a venue, because a lot of places do have a quadraphonic setup. Even Berghain can set up a quadraphonic setup. I've seen a number of quadraphonic shows in Berghain, for example. So it's entirely possible to just get started with just a couple extra speakers. It's a way to get your foot in the door. And if you can't afford that, you can't get those couple of extra speakers, fair enough. There's plenty of binaural tools, and you can just work in headphones and try it out and see how it works for you. So
yeah, I think that's a really good point. Is that with today we're talking about domes and like wave field synthesis or whatever, like lots and lots of speakers, but you get a very good experience in that first kick of like, whoa, sound is coming from all directions with just 2 more speakers, and it can have a really big, and also 4.1, but have the sub.
yes.
Gotta have the, you've got to feel it,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that is, I totally agree with you, and I think it really, because it can be very overwhelming very quickly for people, I think. So strong agree on that.
Well, I think that is our time. So I want to thank all of my lovely panelists here for this wonderful conversation. I hope that everybody is taking something away with them from this conversation, and hopefully going to go check out getting a custom HRTF set up for you.
I would just say, though, that eventually we will be able to have our own in an accessible way.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thank you all for being here, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you.